Well, the Malaysian airline downed yesterday near the Ukraine. Israel attacking Gaza right now, trying to wipe out the tunnels of the Palestinians and the Hamas terror organization. Let's see, we're supporting the Hamas terror organization right now with some money too, aren't we? While our allies, the Israelis, go try and get these people under control. I mean, it's a crazy world out there right now, and a lot of us trying to figure it all out this morning here on the Gary Sutton Show on a Friday as we wrap up a tumultuous week again. But with us this morning, and I read a great piece, and I always like his writing. Rick Manning has been on our show before. He's from Americans for Limited Government. And he wrote a piece yesterday that was in the Hill magazine, and it was about the 50th anniversary of a Barry Goldwater speech. And many of you might say, oh, geez, what, 50th anniversary of Barry Goldwater's speech. But this was kind of the Barry Goldwater speech. It was his acceptance speech at the 1964 Republican for the Republican nomination for president, and he eventually lost, obviously, to Lyndon Johnson a little over a year after President Kennedy was killed. At the time, I can remember as a kid, a lot of people saying, oh, man, this Goldwater guy's off the wall. What's the matter with him? He's nuts. He'll push the button. We'll be at a nuclear war in a heartbeat. I mean, that was what was being said at the time. And now we look back on his words, and we wonder if maybe the guy was not a visionary, and that's kind of where Rick Manning comes in this morning. From Americans for Limited Government and writer of this awesome article. Good morning, Rick. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Gary?
Rick, I'm doing well. I don't often say awesome, my friend, but I got to tell you, this was an awesome piece. And I think it really kind of comes into a good context today with all that is going on. When you look back at the main line out of that speech, it was extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. Moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. And many people heard those words at the time and maybe took them the wrong way. Tell us a little bit about the basis of your article. I know you also took yourself back to school a little bit on this too, right?
Yes, I did. The article itself was really written because I wanted people to remember that these basic words that by Goldwater, that it is virtuous to stand up for freedom. It is virtuous to be resolute in standing up for freedom, and there is absolutely nothing that is virtuous about compromising away freedom, about not standing, about running from the fight. And that's what Goldwater was saying in a very, very real way. The words themselves really were a clarion call for the conservative movement in 1964. And not that dissimilarly, it's a clarion call for people who care about liberty today, and in terms of what we're facing in this country and what we're willing to do from a political perspective to try to accomplish, get our country back to be able to reestablish liberty in this nation, reestablish the principles of limited government, reestablish the principles of constitutional government. And it isn't going to be for the meek to go forward and make this happen. We're going to have to be strong. We're going to have to be resolute. And there's going to be some people who are going to be offended, and they're not going to like it, and they're going to be on both sides of the aisle.
There was an interesting parallel that I thought you drew in the article where you said the establishment Republicans, then known as Rockefeller Republicans, played the same cozy games with their Democratic masters as the establishment Republican class does today with crony capitalist beneficiaries of the big government. I thought you made a great point there.
Well, thank you. It's what we always see as the easy path is to accommodate. The easy path is to say, oh, we'll only get a little bit more big government, or we'll argue over who the beneficiaries of big government are, rather than whether big government should exist at all. And that's been the path of least resistance that has been pursued by Rockefeller Republicans or crony capitalist Republicans today, and it's the wrong path. It's a path that ends up leading us to nothing more than larger and larger government encroaching upon all of our freedoms, where the only people who actually are the beneficiaries of government are those with a stake in the game, who have a lobbyist in D.C., and to the detriment of the rest of us. And that's what we're fighting against. It's the same fight Barry Goldwater was fighting 50 years ago.
We're looking for people today, and you pose this in your article, said the very concept that a man standing up for his beliefs without apology or compromise is heroic and great simply due to his clear-eyed piercing of the veil of big government political conformity that was in dispute. Where are those people today? And I guess added to that question, Rick, when did we start worrying about straight talk in this country? When did we worry that straight talk about issues, saying it the way it is, pointing it out, and then getting to doing something about it, where did that disappear? Because at least the perception is that we're not doing very much about this. We're not even talking straight about it a lot of times. We're dodging a lot of the components of the really tough issues that we have to deal with out there as a country.
I think we romanticize the past a little bit in that we assume that straight talk has existed at some point in time. I'm a little more cynical than that. I think politics has always been politics.
Yeah.
Recognize that Lincoln didn't win a majority of the vote. I mean, Lincoln won in a three-way race back in 1860, running on a platform to get rid of slavery. So, pretty straight talk, and yet he certainly didn't get a majority of the vote. Obviously, the country is much different then, but it just goes to the point that straight talk itself has often not been the key dividing line in terms of whether or not you win or lose. Mm-hmm. I think the last president we've had who's relied on real straight talk has been Reagan,
right?
Who didn't back away from what he believed, and now he did govern much more as a compromise in a compromised manner than many people will remember. But the truth of the matter is he stated principles clearly, and he stood behind those principles, and he didn't back down from them. And I think our country longs for that today. Out of modern politicians, what you see though is people like, I'll use Sarah Palin, and I know that it causes people to feel different ways. Uh-huh. But Sarah Palin is somebody who came up and she told it like she saw it, and people responded to that immediately at the convention in 2008, and bumped the McCain numbers way up and actually made it a competitive race. But the truth is that in modern politics, the both sides have to cut that person down.
Exactly.
And as a result, you end up with both sides cutting away at Sarah Palin to where she's become a little bit marginalized in the general public, because people who don't know suddenly say, "Oh, everybody says she's extreme, so consequently she must be." But when you listen to her, she's just talking common sense. Ted Cruz faces the same challenge right now, although he's got them on the run a little bit in the Senate. That they're trying to do the same thing to a Ted Cruz. I see a guy like Scott Walker in Wisconsin who's taken on some really big, heavy issues and has successfully leveraged them. It remains to see how he's going to play on the national stage, but I think he's a guy who has the capacity to do that. Bobby Jindal down in Louisiana, I think, has a capacity to do that. But there are people out there who will tell the truth. The question is, as Jack Nicholson once famously said, can we handle the truth?
Well, and I come back. You mentioned Reagan being the last guy that kind of talked straight. Reagan also kind of said, I'm going to come up with about 4 things here, actually, I'm going to get done. But I'm only the architect. I want to go out and find the people who can actually put the girders down and so forth. And what he did is he hired some pretty smart people to go out and do that. Today we have a president who basically has said, I'm the architect, and by the way, I'll make the speeches, and then we don't see the follow-up and the work to go out and do the fundamental change. And when we do, it's shoddy at best. No one wants to buy the building.
Well, and let's remember that if you sell somebody something that isn't true, and you tell them something, and then it turns out that the whole premise isn't true, and they buy it based on a lie, they're going to be upset by the lemon that they've now have in their garage. And then
they come and tell you that it's still good because they say it's good.
Right, and then they say, well, it meets all the manufacturer specs, but it doesn't run, and so that's the problem that Obama has, is he sold products to the American people using the trust of the presidency that he sold a lie. And in selling a lie, he believed that you can continue to tell the lie and nobody would notice that it was a lie. And now the chickens are coming home to roost, and he's sitting there now trying to desperately spin his way out of it. And the truth is he's caught in his own web, and there's really no escape.
We're talking with Rick Manning of Americans for Limited Government, who wrote a great piece here for The Hill. You make a second point, and this really comes to this morning. Standing and fighting for freedom against insurmountable odds, never backing down, giving no quarter in spite of the temptation to compromise to gain political favor is important. And I know you were referring more to people in this country, but yet you look at our country right now, we've often been seen as the group that stood and fought for freedom for others in order to save freedom for ourselves. And yet at the same time, we look today, we've exited from Afghanistan, we've exited from Iraq, where, we say, let's close Gitmo because then the terrorists will think we're, I guess, nicer, gentler people. We want to get out of all these different places in the world. And yet now we see today all around the globe, despite what Josh Earnest said earlier in the week about the administration helping to make this more tranquil world, it's not very tranquil. And we wonder this morning, and I'm not laying all the blame at the president's feet, but, it may end up going there. How much of that is our fault because of these policies where we're stepping away from standing up for freedom as a country, as we also ask people in our country to stand up for freedom for themselves?
The United States, over the past 50 years, has held the world together. It's been a Pax Americana across the world because people knew people who meant to oppress others and people who were free and were attempting to gain freedom knew that they could depend on the United States as a steady partner for freedom. And that looked different in different places, and it didn't always look pretty, but it was the truth, and it's what people knew to be true across the world, even though it wasn't always uniformly applied. That compact that we were the beacon of freedom and we were going to stand for freedom has been broken. The president has, through his policies, has effectively broken that commitment to the world. And by breaking that commitment to the world, we now have all these people who are testing it and proving that, in fact, that commitment doesn't exist. And that's why the world seems to be spinning out of control in foreign policy, because there's no longer an implied threat that if you go off and threaten freedom, you'll have to deal with the most powerful nation on earth, and it's going to end up badly for you. The choice by our nation to move away from that commitment to freedom around the world and to become more isolationist has consequences, and we're seeing the fruits of those consequences around the world right now, and it's going to get worse.
Rick, when we come back for our final segment here, I want to talk a little bit more where we started about extremism and moderation, and why extremism maybe is something now that we have to think about in a world where a lot of extreme things are happening. Rick Manning will be right back with us here on the Gary Sutton Show. He's from Americans for Limited Government, outstanding writer in his own right, and had a great piece on The Hill magazine. We'll be right back with him here on the Gary Sutton Show on News Radio 910 WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Rick Manning from Americans for Limited Government with us here this morning. We're a great piece that was in the Hill magazine this week. In fact, one of the best pieces I saw, and it was really celebrating the idea of the 50th anniversary of the famous Barry Goldwater acceptance speech at the Republican National Convention, where he said, extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. Moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. You mentioned that you tried that. You were having a debate in your class back at that time, Rick, and that maybe your classmates, even though you thought you made a pretty darn good argument, didn't really accept it too well, did they?
Well, no. Unfortunately, this was about, it wasn't right at contemporary. It was about 10 years later. And my classmates did, in fact, vote Bigfoot to be great, but they did not vote Barry Goldwater to be great. And my argument was very simple. My argument was, remember, I'm an 11th grader at the time. My argument was simple. It wasn't what he was standing for. It wasn't his policies that made him great. It was the fact that he was willing to stand up and fight for those policies and not compromise, even though standing up and fighting almost assuredly made it so it was impossible for him to be elected president. And that he was willing to sacrifice his own personal ambition for a greater more important thing, and that is the freedom of man. And that, to me, was the thing that drove Barry Goldwater, that made him unique, that made him special. Yeah. And it's politicians like that who put country first, who put freedom first over personal ambition. Those are the ones that I like to hold up as being exemplars for us to try to emulate, because that's the best of us.
I want to pose something to you here, Rick. When he says extremism in defense of liberty is no vice, that is there extremism in the defense of liberty? In other words, what we call extreme today. You know, I can remember when Ron Paul was running for president, and he's talking about the Constitution. And I didn't agree with all the things that he had to say, for example, necessarily on foreign policy and so forth. But I'm thinking he's standing up for things that are in the Constitution, for freedom, and yet they said, well, he's unelectable. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a second. A guy's unelectable for standing for the Constitution? I wasn't necessarily a Ron Paul fan. Doesn't matter if you were or you weren't. But he did speak well to the Constitution, and he did live what he talked about, and he spoke well about freedom.
Yes, he did, and that's and truthfully, the reason that Ron Paul was the only candidate who actually had a real following of supporters that have made a mark on the Republican Party after his exit from the scene is because he did stand for something, and because he did say it clearly, and he wasn't afraid to say it. It's how you in this world, you don't create change by accepting the status quo and saying let's do a little bit less of that. You create change by demanding freedom, by pushing freedom, because people will go to that like a fly to a light. So you're sitting there and you're saying, this is what we're doing. You just put a big vision and you allow people to come to that big vision. That's how you move. That's how you move people, and that's how you move this behemoth. And that's what I was trying to accomplish through this piece, is to give people that kind of vision so they can cling to it for the future.
I think you did it. Extremism in the defense of liberty is principled. Moderation in the pursuit of justice is maybe aimless. Maybe that's a way of taking one of the things I took away from it. Thanks for a great article, Rick. Always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for taking the time this morning. Really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
Take care. Always a pleasure. Rick Manning with us here this morning. Yeah. Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. Maybe words we need to remember. What is extremism, though? Standing up and speaking your mind, is that extremism? Many would have us believe that today. But that's extreme? Moderation is a better way to go in the pursuit of justice. Is that really a virtue? Or is it just kind of the easy way out?